Imagine waking up every day with a subtle weight pressing on your chest. Not from exhaustion, not from fear, but from the constant need to be someone you're not. You smile when you're uncomfortable. You agree when you'd rather speak up. And the strangest part? You don't even notice it anymore. It's become so normal that you mistake it for kindness, for humility, even for maturity. But deep down, a quieter voice whispers the truth. You are living for other people. Carl Jung didn't see this as a minor social flaw. He saw it as a crisis of the soul. The moment you begin caring more about how you're perceived than who you truly are, you fracture. You split into two: the person you show and the person you bury. And the longer you perform, the more distant you become from your real self. You think you're afraid of judgment, but what you're really afraid of is disconnection. You fear that if you stop pleasing, if you stop editing yourself for comfort and applause, you'll be left behind. That if you're honest, truly honest, you'll be unloved. But Jung saw through that illusion. He believed the only way to experience real connection, real confidence, real peace was through authenticity. And that means confronting the parts of yourself you've been taught to hide. This isn't a pep talk. It's not a just stop caring cliche. It's a deep dive into the psychological machinery that keeps you trapped in a life filtered through fear. Today, we explore the truth behind why you care what people think and how to finally stop. Not through indifference, but through transformation. Because the goal isn't to be liked, it's to be whole. And wholeness begins where performance ends. Most people don't live their lives. They perform them. Every action, every word, every expression is carefully calibrated, not for truth, but for approval. We dress for it. We speak for it. We censor our thoughts, our dreams, even our silence, just to stay acceptable. Somewhere along the way, we stopped asking, "What do I want?" and started asking, "What will they think?" And we began shrinking, not physically, but spiritually, until our lives became prisons built from the glances and expectations of others. Carl Jung saw this not as vanity, but as a tragedy. Because the moment we begin molding ourselves to match the gaze of the crowd, we lose something essential: the self. Not the self you post about or present at dinner parties, but the raw, unedited self that exists before the world tells you who you're allowed to be. That self becomes buried under layers of roles, opinions, and applause. This prison isn't made of iron bars. It's made of assumptions. You assume they're judging. You assume they care. You assume their approval defines your worth. And so, your identity is no longer grounded in your experience. It's outsourced to the imaginary courtroom you live inside every day. You curate yourself, believing that one wrong move could cost you love, respect, belonging. But Jung's work reveals a painful irony. The more you contort yourself for acceptance, the more disconnected you become, not just from others, but from yourself. The real damage isn't the judgment of others. It's the erosion of your authenticity. You forget who you were before the performance began. To break free, you first have to see the cage. That's what this chapter is, a mirror. One that doesn't flatter. One that asks, not who are you to others, but who are you without them? Long before you chose who to be, you were taught who to become. You learned that certain behaviors got smiles, while others brought silence. That honesty could cause discomfort, and discomfort made people leave. So you adapted. You crafted a version of yourself that fit, polished, predictable, palatable. Jung called this version the persona, not your true self, but the mask you wear to survive in society. The persona isn't inherently fake. It's necessary. We need it to navigate the world, to interact, to play our roles. But the danger begins when you forget it's a mask, when you confuse the role with the actor, when the applause becomes so addictive that silence starts to feel like rejection. Over time, this mask hardens. You become what others expect, not because you're weak, but because it feels safer. You show people the version of you that fits their story, while hiding the parts that don't. Your doubts, your anger, your ambition, your desire to be seen without explanation. All of it gets tucked away, just out of view. And slowly, the distance between who you are and who you appear to be becomes unbearable. Jung believed this split was the beginning of inner conflict. Because when your persona becomes your identity, the real self begins to decay beneath it. You start to feel hollow, restless, like you're playing a part in a story you didn't write. And every compliment, every like, every bit of approval only deepens the illusion. You look successful, happy, composed, but inside, you're lost. To stop caring what people think, you don't just need courage. You need clarity. Clarity about who's behind the mask and why you put it on in the first place. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before you started hiding. It's easy to say we're afraid of judgment, but that's not the full story. Judgment is just the surface ripple. Beneath it lies something older, deeper, harder to name. We're not just afraid of disapproval. We're afraid of exile, the silent kind, the kind where you speak your truth and the room goes quiet, where you're no longer invited, no longer needed, no longer safe. That fear isn't modern. It's ancient, and it's written into the nervous system of every human being. Jung believed that buried beneath our behaviors is the collective unconscious, an inherited psychological blueprint shaped by centuries of survival. And in that blueprint, one fear towers above the rest: the fear of separation from the tribe. In early human history, exile wasn't just social discomfort. It was a death sentence. To be alone meant to be vulnerable. To speak against the group meant risking everything. So our minds evolved not just to connect, but to conform. You might not live in a village anymore. You might not fear wolves at night. But that survival instinct is still alive. Every time you hesitate to speak, every time you edit your truth, every time you shrink your voice just to fit the room, you're not being polite. You're responding to an invisible, ancestral fear. The fear that authenticity equals abandonment. This fear is why so many people trade freedom for acceptance, not because they're weak, but because they're human. But Jung's work invites us to evolve, to realize that safety isn't found in shrinking ourselves. It's found in wholeness. You won't die for being real, but you will slowly fade for never trying. And if you keep mistaking silence for safety, you'll spend your whole life surrounded by people who never truly know you, including yourself. Sometimes, what you fear in others is really what you haven't faced in yourself. That's the unsettling truth Jung uncovered with his theory of projection. When someone judges you, mocks you, ignores you, it stings, not just because of what they did, but because of what it reflects. Their gaze becomes a mirror, and in it, you see your own insecurities staring back. the fear of being unworthy, the guilt for not living up to your potential, the doubt that maybe, just maybe, they're right. Projection is the mind's way of avoiding confrontation with the uncomfortable. Instead of owning what we feel, we cast it outward. You call someone arrogant when, deep down, you're ashamed of your own desire to be seen. You resent someone's confidence, not because they're wrong, but because they've embraced a part of themselves you've rejected. We think we're reacting to them, but really, we're reacting to our reflection in them. This is why other people's opinions feel so heavy, why one insult can echo in your mind for weeks. It's not the words, it's the internal agreement you already made with them. The judgment hits a wound you've never healed, but that pain, it's not punishment, it's revelation. It's the part of you still waiting to be acknowledged. Jung believed the only way to free yourself from projection was through awareness. To stop seeing others as threats and start seeing them as guides. Every emotional reaction is a flashlight pointing inward. And the more you track the beam, the closer you get to yourself. When you stop running from your reflection, people lose their power over you. Because what once felt like judgment starts to feel like clarity. And clarity is the beginning of freedom. Not from others, but from your own illusions. There's a part of you you've spent years avoiding. It doesn't smile on cue. It doesn't shrink to stay likable. It doesn't care if it makes others uncomfortable. That part lives in the dark, not because it's evil, but because it was never given permission to exist. Jung called it the shadow, the collection of your disowned qualities, buried beneath layers of shame, silence, and self-control. And as long as that shadow remains unseen, it will run your life from the background. When you care too much about what others think, it's usually because you've made their opinion louder than your own. You've outsourced your self-worth to their approval. But the reason you feel so vulnerable isn't just external pressure. It's the internal war between who you are and who you pretend to be. The parts of yourself you've labeled wrong or too much are still alive, still active. But instead of expressing them consciously, they emerge in anxiety, resentment, overthinking. They make you fragile, not because they're flaws, but because they're unacknowledged. Jung believed the path to freedom wasn't in suppressing the shadow. It was in integrating it. Not acting out every impulse, but recognizing that your anger has boundaries to teach you. Your envy has unfulfilled desires to reveal. Your fear has truths to uncover. When you face the parts of yourself you were told to hide, something radical happens. You stop needing constant approval. You stop performing for permission. Because you finally built a relationship with the one voice that matters, your own. The more you integrate your shadow, the less validation you require. You become anchored, grounded. You no longer need to be understood by everyone because you understand yourself. And when that happens, people's opinions lose their power, not because you stopped listening, but because you finally started leading. Most people don't live their lives. They inherit them. They follow the path their parents hoped for, adopt the beliefs their culture rewards, chase dreams they never truly question, and they wonder why something always feels off. Carl Jung called this disconnection a failure to individuate, the refusal to become who you really are, not who you were taught to be, not who the world wants you to be, but the full, unfiltered self waiting beneath the roles, the masks, the compromises. Individuation isn't about rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's not about rejecting others. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's the process of bringing the conscious and unconscious into harmony, so you no longer live at war with your instincts, your thoughts, or your desires. It's not comfortable. It's not quick. But it's the only path that leads to authenticity. And once you taste that, approval becomes a cheap substitute. When you begin to individuate, you'll feel resistance. People will say you've changed, that you're selfish, that you're difficult. And they won't be wrong. You have changed. You've stopped betraying yourself to belong. You've stopped bending just to be liked. And that threatens people who haven't yet dared to do the same. But what you lose in surface-level approval, you gain in something deeper: alignment. Your words start to match your truth. Your choices reflect your core. You no longer live for applause, but for resonance. Not every room will celebrate you, but the right ones will feel like home. Jung believed that individuation was not just personal, it was spiritual. It's the soul's movement toward wholeness. And when you begin that journey, you stop chasing the spotlight of others' validation, because you've finally lit the fire within. And from there, you don't need to be seen to know you exist. You've spent years chasing the glow of other people's approval, hoping it would warm the cold places inside you. And maybe, for a moment, it did. A compliment, a nod, a seat at the table. But the warmth never lasted, because what you were really searching for wasn't praise. It was permission. Permission to be yourself, without apology. And that kind of peace doesn't come from the outside. It's born in alignment. Carl Jung understood that the ultimate goal isn't popularity, it's integration. A life where your actions are guided by your truth, not by the shifting opinions of the crowd. That's what alignment is. It's not rebellion. It's not arrogance. It's the quiet, grounded clarity that comes when your inner world and your outer choices finally match. It's not needing to impress, because you already feel complete. When you live in alignment, people's approval becomes optional, not essential. You can appreciate praise without chasing it. You can hear criticism without collapsing. Because your worth isn't rented from the world. It's rooted in something deeper: self-recognition. And in that recognition, you stop trying to manage how you're perceived and start focusing on who you're becoming. Not everyone will like you when you stop performing. But the people who do, they'll be drawn to your depth, not your mask. And more importantly, you will like you. Not the curated version, not the filtered persona, but the real, evolving self underneath it all. This is where the journey ends and begins. You don't need to stop caring what people think by hardening your heart. You stop caring by strengthening your soul. Because when you're finally aligned with who you are, you don't need to be seen to know you're real. You feel it. And that feeling, quiet, steady, unshakable, is freedom.